The Atlantic coast of France, with its steep chalk cliffs and pebbled beaches, an ideal vacation spot for summer tourists. But in mid-August 1942, this coast was the scene of the bloodiest day in Canadian military history, when the Allies decided to strike back at the Nazis with a large-scale seaborne raid at the quiet French resort town of Dieppe.
This is Dieppe Canadian War Cemetery. After the fall of France in 1940, the only way the Allies could strike back at the Germans was by air or through commando-style raids. This is the grave of Private Eugene Neal, the Essex Scottish Regiment. He was killed in action at Dieppe, 19th of August, 1942. He was 50 years old. Private Neal was one of 900 Canadian soldiers who died at Dieppe for king and country.
Summer 1942. For years, the Allies have been training in Britain, preparing for their eventual invasion of Nazi-occupied Europe. And now the Allied command decides to test German defenses by launching a large-scale seaborne raid to seize a fortified seaport. Their objective, a quiet French seaside town, Dieppe.
This is the port of Dieppe. By the summer of 1942, Canadian troops had been in England for 2 years, training. They felt they were the best trained troops in the world and they were ready for some action. They would get their chance here on the beach at Dieppe.
Eager to see its men in action, the Canadian government has volunteered 5,000 Canadians, who with 1,000 British troops board their ships on August 18th, 1942, and set off towards the coast of France. On board one of the ships is a young soldier with the Royal Regiment of Canada, 18-year-old Jack Poulton.
Dear Mum, I am writing this letter on board the troop carrier HMS Queen Emma. We are finally going to see action. At present, we are headed for Dieppe, a German-held port on the French coast. There are hundreds of ships taking part in this operation. I only hope that we are as good as our fathers were in the Great War.
Secretly and at night, the flotilla sails 100 kilometers across the English Channel to a position just off Dieppe. The plan is for the Canadians to land under the cover of darkness and capture 2 headlands at Pourville and Puy that overlook and defend the beach at Dieppe itself. But the 2 headlands are heavily fortified by the Germans with bunkers, machine guns, and mortars.
This is the beach at Puy. On August 19th, this was the responsibility of the Royal Regiment of Canada. They were to storm ashore, take the village, and capture the eastern headlands. That would protect the attack of the main beach. But this is a formidable position, and the only way they were going to take it was by surprise.
We are preparing all our weapons for action, and we'll be firing them in anger tomorrow. We must have the benefit of surprise and the cover of darkness. We volunteered and trained very hard for this, and would not want to miss it under any condition. I know that your thoughts and prayers will be with me tomorrow, on August 19th. Your loving son, Jack.
As they approach Dieppe, the ships are spotted by a German convoy, and the skirmish scatters the flotilla. Now the Canadians will arrive at Puy in full daylight, in plain view of the defending Germans.
Now we are landing, 20 to 25 minutes late and in full daylight. Suddenly all hell breaks loose. The sky lights up in a giant display of fireworks. It sounds like 1,000 guns firing. Within 500 yards of the beach, we come under heavy machine gun and mortar fire. The bullets hitting the hull of the landing craft sound like hail on a tin roof.
When the first wave hit Puy's beach, it was met by a hail of German machine gun fire, and the men were shot down as they left the landing craft and tried to cross the beach. The same thing happened for the second and third waves. The only way the men could survive was to run across their fallen comrades and get to the seawall or the base of the cliffs. Within minutes, the battle was a bloody shambles.
I staggered up the beach with a machine gun kicking up the stones at my feet. I still wonder how he missed me. As the smoke screen was clearing, I emerged aghast at the carnage before me, and I knew I'd landed in hell.
As the Royal Regiment of Canada is being slaughtered at Puy, 6 kilometers to the west at Pourville, the South Saskatchewan Regiment has landed right on time.
This is a German bunker near Pourville. It has a commanding view over the village itself, and the plan on August 19th was for the South Saskatchewan Regiment to land on the beach, capture the village, then push up here and capture the western headlands. By doing that, they would protect the main landing on the Dieppe beach.
The Canadians fight their way through the village of Pourville, but fail to take the heights. And now the German guns on both the eastern and western headlands can focus their fire on the main Canadian landings at Dieppe.
This is the main beach at Dieppe, and of course this was the major Canadian battlefield of August 19th, 1942. The plan was for the Essex Scottish to land right in front of us in this position, the Royal Hamilton Light Infantry down by the casino, and of course they'd be supported by the Calgary tanks. You can see a couple of problems right off the bat, of course. The Germans have all the high positions, a defender's paradise. And secondly, this is a very big beach, and 1,500 soldiers really don't seem like very many to attack it. The infantry came in on time. The Essex Scottish landed right here, and the Rileys opposite the old casino, but the tanks were late. That meant the Essex Scottish had to cross this esplanade in heavy machine gun fire, and they're basically shot down as they crossed the beach. By the time the tanks actually arrived, they were able to advance across the beach, but they had to go around all the dead and wounded and get into the city. The problem was the city was all blocked off, and they couldn't advance onto their objectives. So after a while, they were withdrawn to this area here, where they fired to support the infantry. By this time, the Germans have been hammering the Canadians, and the beach is littered with the dead and wounded and burning vehicles.
Crouching on the beach with the Royal Hamilton Light Infantry is Captain Dennis Whittaker.
I was determined to get my men off before the enemy artillery, mortars, and machine guns annihilated us. To our right, I saw the casino. We got inside, entering on the run and firing our Sten guns. The building was filled with Germans. In the fight that followed, some were shot. We jumped out the window and over the bodies of the enemy to a low wooden shelter. As we arrived here, a heavy concentration of mortar bombs came down on us. It was impossible to move. We lay there for 20 or 30 minutes, feeling great revulsion for every German alive.
skies above, hundreds of RAF and RCAF fighters try to protect the ships and troops from hundreds of German fighters and dive bombers. The RAF fighters managed to draw German planes away from the troops on the beach. But in just a few hours, the Allies lose 106 aircraft. The most costly day in the war for fighter command. On the main beach at Dieppe, the first wave is pinned down and being slowly slaughtered. And with communications in disarray, the commander, 10 miles out to sea, believes the raid is going well and prepares to send 1,000 more troops into the killing fields at Dieppe. Less than an hour after it began, the attack on Dieppe has turned into a massacre. Thinking the battle is going well, the commander on the flotilla decides to send in more troops. With the Fusiliers Montréal is Montrealer Sergeant Major Lucien Dumais.
The smokescreen was a flaming vortex. We were in it for less than a minute as we were traveling at full speed. The beach was a shambles, and a lot of our men from the second wave were lying there, either wounded or dead. Some of the wounded were swimming out to meet the flotilla, and the sea was red with their blood. We stood by as they died, powerless to help. We were there to fight, not to pick up the wounded, but the whole operation was beginning to look like a disaster. Many of the Rileys had been cut down on the beach, and now it was us who were falling right and left. The air was seething with flying steel, and it seemed impossible to make the 200 yards across the beach without being killed. Nobody could get through that.
Leading his men through the hail of fire is the commander of the Fusiliers Montréal, Lieutenant Colonel Dalla Ménard.
I think I had taken 3 steps when the first one hit me. When the second bullet got me, there was pain with this one, as the bullet burned through my cheek. I picked up my pistol again and pushed myself to my feet. When we got over the parapet, the third bullet hit me and went clean through my wrist. I barely felt it. There were plenty of snipers around. One of them got me. It had the same sledgehammer effect as the first bullet, but this time I managed to stay on my feet and keep going. When the 5th bullet hit me just above the right ankle, it kicked my leg out from under me, and I went down again.
A handful of troops fight their way into the town, but realizing that the raid is a disaster, they retreat. 5 hours after the landings, boats race in to try to rescue the survivors.
There was a mad rush for the boats. They came over the doors, they came over the side, and as the boat was rocking, these dead bodies were coming in. There was shot coming through the doors. I remember seeing bodies at the water's edge, rolling back and forth with the surf. And you could tell where the craft had come in because there were groups of bodies at a given point where a craft had loaded.
Of the almost 4,000 Canadians who attacked the beaches, only 1,000 make it back to the ships. Thousands are left behind, most of them dead or wounded.
Of all the bloody actions fought by the Canadians, to me, Puy is the worst. Without surprise and proper artillery support, it was suicide. 1 in 3 of the attackers died. This plaque reads, On this beach, officers and men of the Royal Regiment of Canada died at dawn, 19 August 1942, striving to reach the heights beyond. You who are alive on this beach, remember that these men died far from home, that others, here and everywhere, might freely enjoy life in God's mercy.
Of the 2,700 men left behind, only 1,800 survive and are taken prisoner. This Allied test of Nazi defenses proves that a seaborne invasion of Europe will not be easy. And the demonstration comes at a high price. In a few hours, almost 900 young Canadians have died on the beaches of Dieppe.
This is Dieppe Canadian War Cemetery. It contains the graves of 1,000 Commonwealth servicemen. 800 were killed at Dieppe. This is the grave of Private Kenny Ingram, the Royal Regiment of Canada. He was killed in action at Puy, 19th of August, 1942, and he was 20 years old. It's remarkable that he's buried with his brother, Sergeant Robert Ingram, also of the Royal Regiment of Canada. He was killed 13th of August, 1944, near Caen, and he was 23. The inscription reads, "Beloved only sons of George Allen and Mary Alma Ingram, Toronto, Canada." This is the grave of Sergeant Charles Teether, the Royal Hamilton Light Infantry, the Rileys. He was killed in action at Dieppe on the 19th of August, 1942. His inscription reads, "From tired joy and grief afar and near thee, Father, where thine own children are, I love to be." He was 37 years old. Dieppe was the darkest day of the war for Canada, but it told the Allies that any invasion would have to be better planned and better executed. It also told them courage can only go so far.
After the bloody failure of the seaborne raid at Dieppe, Nazi Germany's hold on Fortress Europe seems even more impregnable. For a time, there will be only one way for the Allies to strike back: from the air. After the failure of the seaborne attack at Dieppe, the only way for the Allies to strike back at Nazi Germany is from the air. And the Allies launch massive raids with hundreds of bombers deep into the German heartland, hitting industries and cities, in the hopes of paralyzing the Nazi war machine and destroying the German people's will to fight. The raids require an almost endless supply of bombers and aircrew, and Britain's Bomber Command looks to Canada. Over 130,000 volunteers from all over the Commonwealth and from all over the world are trained on airfields across Canada. One of the 50,000 young Canadians to sign up is 20-year-old Jim Moffat.
I wanted to fly. I wanted to be in the Air Force. But My education didn't qualify me for a pilot, so they said, you better go as a gunner. We have openings for gunners. I didn't know at the time that they were losing a few gunners. We had 122 in the class, and I thought if I really work hard, I could maybe get about halfway up the line. So after they had the exams, they all yelled, "Hey, Moffat, guess where you are?" And I said, "Oh, don't tell me I'm at the bottom." No, guess up. Well, halfway, oh, guess up. I came second in the 122.
Soon, thousands of Canadian airmen are sent to Britain to fly with Britain's Royal Air Force and Canada's Royal Canadian Air Force. And in January 1943, the Royal Canadian Air Force 6th Group of Bomber Command is formed, with its own network of airfields and bases. Soon, the quiet Yorkshire countryside in the north of England is home to thousands of young Canadian airmen.
This is Skipton-on-Swale. And in 1944, these fields were a Canadian air base. Out of respect to the Canadians, the local farmer left some of the buildings standing, and this is the control tower. Although this is not an official memorial, it's a place that is treated with great reverence. There are several wreaths here from the RAF and the British Legion, and all of these people remember the men who served here. This is the top story of the control tower. On the day of an operation, this is where the operation would run from. We'd have up here maybe a squadron leader, an intelligence officer, the med officer, everybody who would coordinate the taking off. This area had 3 airstrips, one right in front of us here, one north and south, and then one connecting them. And for an operation, the aircraft would come in from the dispersal points, fully loaded, and start to take off. You can almost imagine them controlling the planes as they came around, and they went off one by one. And of course, this was crucial. These planes are fully loaded with bombs and fuel, and if you have a mistake at this point, it's catastrophic. Then they'd have to wait, maybe 6 hours, 8 hours, depending where the mission was going to, for the people to come back.
To avoid German fighters and flak, these Bomber Command raids, deep into heavily defended enemy territory, are made at night.
I thought I would be scared stiff. You are scared at portions of it, but everything is so unreal. You're 20,000 feet up, you're looking down, and you see these little black puffs, and you see the flak going up, coming towards the aircraft. Sometimes, if they're underneath, your aircraft jumps, and sometimes you hear a rattling of steel against metal, and you hope that nothing comes through and touches you. On our third trip, we were crossing the Dutch coast, and we're still green. We had a fighter on our tail. He'd get up on us, and we'd go diving down, and we couldn't see him at all. There was a little aerial at the back that go pip, 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 pip. We knew he was there because this thing was pipping away, but we couldn't see him. And of course, it went a little faster, and then he hit us. Just like someone throwing a handful of peas against a tin roof, but he hit the bomb load. And there was fire shooting out of the bomb load like a blowtorch. So my job, hello, skipper, fire coming from the bomb load. And he said, oh, hell, I can see it from here. And he puts it in a dive to get the fire out. And he said, navigator, give me a reciprocal course for back home. Fortunately, the fire goes out. Fortunately, the fighter left us alone. I guess he thought he had one. And we headed for home. He called each crew member. The wireless op didn't answer and the tail gunner didn't answer. So I said, I think Jack has bought it because I see pieces of the turret sticking up. Do we go all the way up to the North Yorkshire? We have a wounded man and we have 2 people dead and starting to run short of fuel. We can't get the wheels down. The hydraulics are shot away. So he said, tells the commander down there, we're landing on our bomb load.
If there was a problem on the way back, if they signaled that they had a man wounded aboard or engines were out, they would call for the recovery units. And it's fascinating that these buildings are still here. One's for the fire engine or the fire truck. The second one's for the ambulance, to get out as quickly as possible if a plane had problems. The problem with a returning plane was it was often out of control or could easily go out of control. And these meant very tense moments in the control tower.
He said, well, fly around for half an hour. Give us time to get everybody in the air raid shelter. So we're flying around. And Cardy, our engineer, comes to. He had passed out. He was shot in the eye and the arm and broke his arm. Well, he said, we have to cut a hydraulic line, a specific one, to lower the wheels. So he passed out 3 times, trying to show us which one. And finally we do, and we cut the line. The wheels come down, we land. The minute we stop, it explodes in flames again. The one thing I did regret, I should not have gone around to the back of the back turret to check Jack Finley, because he got a 20mm shell, and it wasn't a pleasant sight. He was a very good friend, and after that, I made no friends. I had people that I would drink with and so on, but I made sure that I had no real personal friends after that, because you can't live with it.
By 1944, Bomber Command is losing over 50 aircraft a week. The chances of an airman surviving a full tour of 30 operations is only 2 in 10.
This is what remains of one of the 3 airstrips at Skipton. During a day of a mission, each aircraft would be out here on its dispersal point, and the aircrew would be basically hanging around waiting to see whether a mission was canceled or whether it was a go or not. They'd watch as the bombs would be delivered and brought into the bomb bays. When they brought out extra fuel tanks, that means the raid was going to be in Germany, and all the crew knew what that meant.
On the night of March 30th, 1944, all over England, thousands of airmen and hundreds of bombers gather for what will be one of Bomber Command's most ambitious raids. More than 1,000 kilometers away, deep into heavily defended German airspace. The target, Nuremberg.
At Skipton, most of the buildings are still here. There's the admin building, the ops building, the debriefing room where the intelligence officer would interrogate the crews after a mission. And over here is the parachute building. Here they prepared the parachutes for the next operation. The briefing building was very similar to this one, and there the pilots and the navigators would be brought together and informed of the next operation, the route in, the weather, and the target. All across the Yorkshire Dales, hundreds of crews were getting the same target, Nuremberg.
The plan is to draw German fighters away with a spoof or fake raid towards northern Germany, while the real attack, or main bomber stream of over 800 planes, heads south. Then follows a long straight route deep into southern Germany, with a surprise last-minute turn towards Nuremberg. A risky tactic, since the long leg will take the bomber stream over one of the greatest concentrations of German fighter bases and anti-aircraft guns. One of the thousands of aircrew preparing for this massive raid on Germany is rear gunner Jim Moffat.
Around 3 o'clock, you go to briefing, and they tell you the target and the bomb load and the route. On the Nuremberg one, the Pathfinder chief said we should not go. 400 miles, straight line, bright moonlight, no clouds. We never bombed Germany in bright moonlight. So we thought, we're sitting ducks, they're gonna see us. But you go. That was our duty. Around 8 or 9 o'clock, we'd hop in a truck, go out to the aircraft. I would go to the back and be on the tail wheel. Because it was 8 hours before, and I was a little nervous.
This is the nose section of a Halifax bomber, and this is where the pilot sat, and you can see his controls up here and the view that he would have had, or not much of a view. In fact, you can't see anything below him. And you can see here where this is the lever for the bomb bays, which would have to be opened over target. Position under here would be the wireless operator. And in the front were the navigator and the bomb aimer. These are amazingly cramped conditions. And of course, one of the most important positions would be the bomb aimer, because once over target, he's the one who have to make the decision when the bombs would be dropped. And he would signal the skipper. Skipper would open the bomb base, and then the bomb aimer would release the bombs. The flight engineer was just behind me here, and in the back you had the tail gunner and the mid-upper gunner, and that made up the crew of 7.
pilots would start running up their motors. There were 2 squadrons, so there'd be about 30 aircraft warming up. Then we'd see the green light, and we'd start taking off. Every 30 seconds, an aircraft would take off. The wind was blowing everybody off course because they forecast the winds as 50 miles an hour, and it was actually 100 miles an hour. So the navigator refigured his route to the target. As we're starting this long route, I count 22 aircraft going down in flames in 20 minutes.
With clear skies and a bright moon, the hundreds of bombers are clearly visible, sitting ducks for German fighters.
The weather was marvelous. Clear sky. It was simply ideal. It was a Lancaster flying on a steady course. When we were comfortably positioned underneath, the pilot opened fire with an upward firing cannon at one wing, which immediately caught fire. We followed the Lancaster for 5 minutes until it crashed below with a tremendous explosion.
Normally, we'd lose maybe 40 aircraft. We lost 108 that night. Everybody was feeling this is likely the day I get mine. You get to the target, there's a little excitement. You see people weaving because there's flak coming up. And as we went over the target, there was no flak. I thought, well, thank God, we're going to get rid of our bombs and buzz off into the darkness, and we should make it back. We bombed Nuremberg, and then we start heading home. But Red Satyr had forgotten to recalculate his course with the 100-mile-an-hour winds. So after an hour or so, he said, "I'm sorry, Skipper, I have to make a correction of course." We had to turn 45 degrees to port. We were coming into 700 aircraft. We're bound to hit someone if we don't watch it. It was dark, it was quiet, and you can hear everybody has their mic open, and you can hear people breathing. The pilot said, "What the hell?" And then there was a crash. I see this other aircraft go out from underneath. I see him out there. He seems to be flying okay. We seem to be flying okay. And he disappeared in a few seconds. What I didn't know is that we were both pretty well stalled. The radio was dead. So we have a little signal button. I signaled. No answer. And I thought, we've had trouble before. We'll get home. I look to the right, there's a big tail fin. Look to the left, there's nothing. I thought, I'm getting out of here. I unhook my oxygen, pull out my communications cord, open the doors, crawl out, reach for my parachute, and it's dark. You have to do it by feel. Stand up, and I find out I'm halfway out of the aircraft. It's then I realize there's no roof on the aircraft. And I'm realizing now we must be crashing. I jump up on the edge of the aircraft and jump off. And the aircraft is still there. I seem to be just floating. And the aircraft is floating alongside of me. So I kick against the aircraft, I go shooting away, pull my hand away, the chute opens, and it would just like some giant grabs me, and I think the chute's going to go upside down. I'm swinging so much, and I hit the ground. This is where, on March 31st, I arrived by parachute, and I crawled into the forest right in this area. It was night. I couldn't see very much. I stumbled into a log, crawled under the log, and wrapped up my parachute around me and went to sleep. And I wake up, and I hear church bells. And I thought, oh, I must have tied one on last night. And I look up, and I said, trees. I'm an officer. I don't sleep in the forest. Then I realize it all comes back in a rush. I remembered the crash, and I thought, it must be that everybody's dead. I was feeling a bit sad and thought the war was over for me, and maybe I'd just go and give myself up.
Jim Moffat does not surrender. Like many other downed airmen, he's picked up by the Belgian resistance and is hidden for 3 months until the Allied armies arrive and he is free. He is one of the lucky ones. In just one night, on the Nuremberg raid, more than 100 bombers are lost, and more than 500 aircrew die, including 112 Canadians. The raid on Nuremberg has very little effect on the Germans, and the bombing campaign now shifts to support the coming invasion of Normandy, D-Day, June 6th, 1944.
This is Reichwald War Cemetery. The bomber war over Europe was a long and bloody affair, and it cost the lives of 55,000 aircrew. There are 4,000 of them buried here at Reichwald. That represents 800 downed planes. This is the grave of Pilot Officer Wallace Granbois of British Columbia, and he was an air gunner in Bomber Command. He was shot down and lost over Dusseldorf on the 23rd of April, 1944. He was 26 years old. The inscription reads, "Not just today, but every day, in silence we remember." The tragedy of this is that his brother is buried over in Plot 21. He was killed at Mannheim in 1945. The Granbois brothers were only 2 of 10,000 Canadian boys who perished in Bomber Command.
I'm coming to see my crew who are buried here. I'm getting to the stage where I may not be able to travel, so I thought I'd better make this trip. Lloyd Smith moved into my position when I went to the tail gunners, and he paid the price. Stainton, he didn't complete his first flight. That was his first trip. And George Laird, he was a scared man, but a very, very brave man. And Pat Clapham, a very good wireless operator and a fine man. Red Sater and I had just come back from Edinburgh on leave, and he had just about completed his tour, 2 or 3 more flights to do, so it was kind of sad. Joe Corbley, nice fellow from Toronto, had a girlfriend. I wish they were with me. I'm glad they have a nice resting place. And I will never forget them. When I went back, I had a couple of sad duties to perform. One of my best friends that I graduated with, Roger Frenier, he arrived on the squadron after I did. He went across the channel, was shot down, all his crew were killed. And I knew his mother. I had been several times to his home. And she said, "You came back? Why can't my Roger come back?" And I had no answer.